better? Will it deliver value for money? Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen issues flagged in terms of retention and retainment, and the Haythorn review clearly highlighted those. Is he confident that the steps being taken now in terms of the skills agenda will take the necessary actions to address recruitment and retention issues? And in terms, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, of cyber capability, the Haythorn review again highlighted that as a major issue. Is he confident that the steps being taken and outlined today will do enough to deliver that capability in the way that we'd all want to see it?
Secretary of State.
Madam Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman and for his party support on Ukraine. I am very grateful for that. On the Haythorn review and the skills, right across Europe and the West, we are seeing recruitment challenges in its military. I was with my New Zealand counterpart recently and my Canadian, and they too have a challenge. A skill shortage across society is big, and it's no different in the armed forces, and that's why we have to adapt and rapidly change to some of the challenges. Now, on procurement, as I said, the figures have started to improve. Yes, there are challenges. We can debate a whole day here on the reasons for some of those challenges. Complex procurement is not as straightforward, I think, as many people think, and he will know from the Scottish Government's procurement issues it's not very straightforward to deal with. But I certainly believe that if you invest in the people and you are prepared to invest in continuity, and one of the points about the SROs, the people that help manage our projects, instead of having them here today, gone tomorrow, we make sure they're there for the long term and link their incentives to success, then I think we will have a better chance of delivering better value for money.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I express my admiration for my right honourable friend's dedicated and distinguished service as Defence Secretary, and it's a sad commentary on the state of the special relationship that our American ally did not recognise his suitability to be the next Secretary General of NATO. Now, he will remember that successive defence committees, well before the invasion of Ukraine, argued that defence expenditure should never have been allowed to fall below 3% of GDP, and the present Chancellor of the Exchequer, when he was standing for the leadership in 2019, even expressed the wish that it should be at 4% of GDP, which would have taken us back to the Cold War percentage of between 4 and 5.1% of GDP on defence. My question for my right honourable friend, therefore, is in what way does this refresh actually allow defence to have the potential to expand quickly if that extra money is belatedly made available?
Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and you know, long before I was doing this job, he was campaigning for defence to be properly apportioned the funding it deserved to keep this country safe, and I want to pay tribute to that. It's been many years you have fought, the right honourable member has fought for that. In order to make sure that should there be an increase of funding, and I severely hope there will be, I seriously hope there will be, for defence based on the 2.5% pledge of our Prime Minister, that skills, if we invest in our specialties and our skills, we can expand our armed forces when a threat increases. Finding a way to hold those skills on the books, even if they are rarely used, is why it is important to develop a single Armed Forces Act. Currently, we have legislation that says if you want to join the reserves from the regulars, you have to leave the regulars and you have to join a separate legal entity, the reserves. That prevents soldiers going backwards and forwards and people being mobilised in the way we want. We want to introduce a single Armed Forces Act, and we think that will help do that. So the skills is at the core. The second thing is the investment here in rapid procurement, the ability to keep a headroom in the budget to respond to the latest threat as the adversary changes. And thirdly, making sure we invest in sustainability and enablers, because there is really no point in having all those frontline vehicles if you can't get anywhere.
John Speller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know it's considered bad form to speak ill of the dead, even the politically dead. But quite frankly, that contribution was pretty thin and full of cliches, and fundamentally an admission of failure. of 13 years of continuous cuts by this government. Let me take just one example, which is touched on in the report. It was clear from Allied exercises that in any major conflict, we would not only we would run out of artillery munitions within a week, and the Ukraine invasion reinforced that. So why has it taken till this month for the Secretary of State to sign the contract to actually replace those artillery shells?
Well,
Secretary of State.
very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, the honourable gentleman, right honourable, would actually understand sometimes the supply chain has to be reinvigorated. When we placed an order for the NLAW anti-tank weapon, it turned out the optics had been stopped being made 10 years before. You can ring up all you like and try and place an order the next day, but until the manufacturers source the supply chain, it's not going to happen. But what I did do was I made sure I placed the order in the United Kingdom, in the north of England and in Wales. That factory will start producing 155 shells. I've given them a long-term contract of £500 million to start supplying our forces. And by the way, the stockpiles of our ammunition started depleting around about 1997, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank him for his clarity, his calmness, his wisdom and his fortitude? We will miss him. It's very clear that the tectonic plates of geopolitics have changed and they've made the world a much more dangerous place for countries like the United Kingdom and others who believe in freedom and democracy. How will his new global response force help us and our allies to be able to react more quickly, more nimbly when crises do arise? Because we know they will.
Secretary of State.
Well, one of the important lessons of Ukraine is make sure they're digitally glued together, make sure that the command and control is not as vulnerable as they used to be, so have a lot in the rear, as we say, a long way away, maybe thousands of miles away, part of their command and control, with only their headquarters forward. Make sure you invest in the enablers to move them around the world or the continent or wherever you need to be. That will help them. The Global Response Force at the moment, the provisional layout of them is a light brigade and 16 air assault brigade to be put in it, supported by a logistical and support brigade, and that will give us a whole range of opportunities, including meeting our NATO commitment, but should we wish to do something else with it, to be able to deliver.
Kevin Robinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I, as the Defence spokesperson for the DUP and as Deputy Leader of the party, thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his honourable and gallant service to our armed forces. As the Member of Parliament for East Belfast, thank him for the reinvigoration he has given to shipbuilding in our country and the support for Harland and Wolff. Thank him for the commitment he has shown to Talis and the NLAW and the utility that has proven in Ukraine. And as a member of the Defence Select Committee, thank him for utilising our subcommittee's report on soft power and the benefits I see in his statement of defence attachés and engaging them more thoroughly and appropriately with the intelligence network. We have this document today and we can see that it builds upon and augments the refresh. But in recognising the 4 years well served, does he believe that this document will give not only our armed forces the best chance to embrace the future, but leave a lasting legacy for the positive contribution that he has made?
Secretary of State.
Well, the right honourable gentleman, look, this is really about making sure that the framework and the match fit for any expansion and the future. It's also about investing in some of those holes, such as the restockpiling, making sure we are spending over time $2 billion and then another $2 billion over time to make sure that our stockpiles are back where they should be, and in fact even more money as well to do that. That will be good news for the likes of Talis and NLAW in Belfast. It will be good news for those factories in Washington and North Wales for the 155s. It will be good news for our industrial base like MBDA in Stevenage and Bolton. It will all be about investing in our sovereign supply chain and at the same time making sure that we are sometimes making the difference not in the obvious but in the behind the scenes that makes an armed forces so ready.
John Barron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend my right honourable friend for the service and dedication he's given as Secretary of State and wish him well for the future. He will know, as a fellow infantryman, that sometimes there is no substitute for having boots on the ground if one wants to command that ground. What assurance can he give, given that the 1922 Defence Committee produced a paper concerned about hollowing out, as he knows, a paper we submitted to the Defence Command paper refresh, that this hollowing out is going to stop, cuts to the army in particular is going to stop? And what assurance can he give that not only will it stop, but actually it may leave scope to build on those numbers, because at the end of the day, an army of 72,000 and falling is simply not large enough given our commitments.
Secretary of State.
We can argue about size quite a lot. What we have to make sure is whatever we put in the field is properly equipped, properly enabled, and is effectively 360. That's really, really important. And therefore, we have to be honest about the size of the envelope of our defence budget. There's no point pretending we can have huge numbers if we don't have a defence budget that matches that. And I have been determined all the way through that this is not purely about a numbers game. And I know my right honourable friend gets that. And many of his suggestions were incorporated into this command paper, because we think the lessons of Ukraine do show, yes, you need infantry and tanks, but you can also dominate the ground sometimes without even being there. The proliferation of cheap drones, the use of highly accurate artillery allows fewer people to cover more area or to dominate more area. I went to see a frontline command in Ukraine at a corps level. That corps commander had nearly 1,000 UASs at his disposal every day, cheap ones. At any one time, he may have 80 or 90 up in the air in feeds. That it gives him the ability to dominate ground without mass necessarily. In the end, you do obviously have to take it, and I get that, but let's make sure that the people that take that ground are properly protected and equipped so they can hold it. Otherwise, as we see in the Russian forces, they take the ground and then they're all killed.
Kevan Jones.
Can I first of all thank the Secretary of State for his service. I think he and I have known each other for 20 plus years, and I know he's always been a strong advocate for defence. He said in his statement that he got a 10% increase from 2019 for the defence budget. What he fails to tell the House is also some of the problems he faces is the 16% cut that was instituted from 2010 to 2019 in the defence budget. The command paper says that the first priority is obviously Homeland Defence and our NATO commitments. It also announces a new global response force. Can I ask the Secretary of State how to commit to both doing those well? We can do it without actually a substantial increase in the defence budget.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend's comments. He'll be glad to know that in 2006, Madam Deputy Speaker, we both went to Washington to lobby for something called ITAR waiver. We are very close to getting it. And that's my point about if you think this department is quick and easy. You know, I had hair, Madam Deputy Speaker, I had hair when we were doing it. So one of the things I'll be proud about is whether we get this ISTAR waiver over the line. It is possible to have a global response force and to dedicate it to NATO, but also NATO is not always... The way we allocate our NATO forces is we give them to the NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, but they are able to be used elsewhere unless he calls on it. That's often how we do it. And so it is perfectly possible to have a global response force and elements of it elsewhere if it's not called upon by the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Of course, absolutely true to this House and everyone else in this House, if NATO calls on it because there is an Article 5 or even something else, that will be the priority. Our forces, more often than not, are absolutely dedicated to NATO and the security of Europe.
Bob Seeley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for his impressive no-nonsense leadership. And it's always great to see a Minister who knows his brief so well. My question, it's been 12 years since the Levine report gave greater powers to single services, but we're now moving in the opposite direction, and greater integration, full spectrum effects, hybrid war, joint effects, call it what you will, linking up the military, but also military and non-state and the tools of other tools of state power. Does the Secretary of State think that Levine is still fit for purpose, and what would he recommend this House and his department do about it?
My honourable friend makes a really important observation about Levine. Now, I don't think Levine is now fit for today. I think there are parts of Levine that have not worked. I do not see the TLBs or the Army, Navy and Air Force take that responsibility we hope they would do when their programmes don't work. And therefore, I think examining, perhaps moving joint force design back to the centre, where these things will be at the core of the MOD, will be important. I also think in other parts of Levine, it is really important to make sure that the centre does have a role in the holding to account our armed forces. In the command paper, there is a commitment to start reviewing that process itself.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I place on record my thanks to the Secretary of State for his service? And as you will know, where I've agreed with him, I've said so, not least in the work he's done supporting Ukraine. But I'm afraid one of maybe his biggest legacy was the fact that he agreed to and oversaw a huge cut of 10,000 in the armed forces, in the army, which I believe seriously weakens our armed forces. But can I just check, Madam Deputy Speaker, just on a question, just test whether this is more than one words, because on page 89 it says we will step up our efforts to deliver an integrated missile defence approach. When will that happen?
Secretary of State.
I'm just looking up page 89. To counter these threats, we will step our efforts to deliver an integrated air and missile defence approach. Yes, not only are we doing that across NATO, integrated with NATO and working with the Germans and indeed the French, we are starting that already. We've signed up to the process. We're starting it now. So by last month, we have started the process of examining what Europe and NATO needs to have the right integrated air defence to protect its territory. Right? The start point is to find out what we need. There's no point us rushing out and buying long-range air defence missiles if it can all be the long range can be done from a ship in the Channel. There's no point rushing out and buying very short range if we're not deploying from our bases in Tidworth. So first of all, the overall survey of what needs to be done, we've already started doing it. Secondly, we've started investing in our next generation of GBAD, our medium-range air defence capability, and we have recognised that we are short of our long-range air defence capability by investing. We're already doing it. I don't know where the honourable member's been for the last 2 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, but if he actually paid attention to it, he would realise we've started investing in the extended range missile for the Type 45. We've started increasing the number of batteries of our GBAD. We've also managed to export our GBAD to Poland for a £2 billion export deal. So we have started it, but the first thing to do is recognise that we put together the right profile of air defence, because as he will know, it is layered, and therefore we have to get the right layers. If you don't get the right layers, you look like some of those countries such as Russia, who just buy big profile things that can't actually talk to each other, and then they get whacked.
Jack Lepresti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by thanking my honourable friend for his service and his leadership? And could I ask if there's anything in this command paper which addresses the barriers and the bureaucracy which is hindering Ukrainian defence manufacturers and British defence manufacturers from collaborating effectively together, because such collaboration can help the Ukrainians liberate their country and enhance our own capability and our supply chain.
There is certainly a very odd thing that I observe in the department. In our Kindred, which is our operation to gift and support Ukraine, I see a procurement speed and delivery that I cannot understand why it can't be normal for us, right? And then I see our procurement in parallel. Now, some of that is about assurances, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're going to fly drones over people in this country. We require much higher levels of assurances. The Civil Aviation Authority, etc., absolutely require it. When you're in war, some of those levels can drop. So some of it is simply that. But other areas, it is one of the lessons we are looking at right now through DNS to try and understand how we can bring that into our main procurement and delivery.
Barry Shinn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Defence, Secretary of State for Defence, knows that I'm not a defence expert, but I have a great interest in defence. I was born the same week as the worst bombing of London, not far from here, on a day very close to the day this place was bombed. And my father served in the last war. But can I say that I have watched him over the years that he's been in this house. I've got a lot of regard for him. We've become quite good friends, which we're allowed to across parties in this house still. He's not perfect, but can I just say to him today, I have been a consistent critic of the fact of going below 100,000 men in our army. A long track record. But he is a better Secretary of State Defence of many I've seen at those benches. But does he realise that we are not daft on this? What has gone on? A Prime Minister and a government could allow a man of his stature as a Defence Secretary to go at the critical time when there's a war in Europe, all hell is breaking out on our planet, and we lose a good Defence Secretary. What's happened with the Prime Minister and a little clique round him?
First of all, can I just thank Honourable Dunn for his very kind comments. I have always liked both sparring and discussing defence with him, and it is important that for many of us in this House, across the House, defence, we understand, is a core function of this government, a government. It's not a discretionary spend stuck on the end. It is ultimately the core responsibility of a government. And I know, come the next election, that the battleground between these two front benches will probably not see defence in it. We all know it, and many of us around this House who have campaigned for more defence will know it will come down to schools and hospitals and and transport and everything else. And the casualty of that is often defence, and we stop making the case to our citizens and our constituents why it is important. And I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman who always reminds people on this side, and certainly under the previous leadership of his party, of the importance of that defence. I have a fantastic team. I think there is plenty of amazing civil servants, military leaders and everyone else who will do just fine without me in this job. And it won't. President Lincoln said the cemetery is full of indispensable men.
Flick Drummond.
My right honourable friend too, and I am extremely disappointed he's stepping down because he has been an excellent Defence Secretary. As my right honourable friend says, people at the centre of our armed forces, so this refresh with its focus on people is welcome. Rick Haythornthwaite's report makes some excellent recommendations, so I'm very pleased that the Defence Command paper reflects this. So can my right honourable friend confirm that accommodation is an absolute priority, because that's the biggest thing that every single member of the armed forces brings up when we go and visit?
Secretary of State.
It absolutely is, and you heard me say I've taken the profit from those companies. I note as a Defence Secretary, I think I've nationalised more things than any previous Defence Secretary, so maybe I'm putting up a job interview on the opposite side. But it is absolutely looking after our people, and you know, I was determined that if these companies could not provide the service, then why should our people take that hit? An extra 400 million to go into it, and some of us will have seen, obviously, the legal test we have tried on Annington Homes to make sure we try and re-franchise issues. It's all very important. We can't give the people that work for us that skills, that future, and indeed that lifestyle that they deserve, then they won't be joining us. So it's really, really important.
Stephen Farry.
I want to start by recognising the leadership of the Secretary of State over Ukraine and the wider threat from Russia. Earlier he made reference to the growing range of threats across the globe and how the UK often has to respond to those. Could I invite him to also go a step further and reflect upon how the MOD can work with other departments in Whitehall and how the UK can work with its international partners around early intervention and prevention, and understand the drivers of conflict, for example, gross human rights abuses, climate change, and the lack of international aid, and see how we can actually get ahead of the curve in some situations.
Secretary of State.
The original Defence Command paper absolutely built on that, and if we couple resilience building of nations such as, sadly, as we can see the case of Mali, for example, if we can get in early enough, help them with security, complement aid, complement work in counter-radicalisation and education and poverty prevention. If we can get in early enough, we can help prevent those conflicts. And one of the messages I give to the Treasury is that small amount of investment saves you a lot of money further along. The CSSF, the funding, sort of Foreign Office, MOD funding, is a really good piece of work where we often fund a whole range of issues that deal with that. And I'm very happy to write to the Honourable Gentleman to give him details of that fund.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for Defence for his regular visits to David Brown Santasalo Gears in Huddersfield, in my constituency, which are in the supply chain for the Type 26 frigates, also for our submarines, and also providing world-leading gearboxes for our armoured vehicles and for our tanks as well. And does he agree with me the importance of having resilient regional supply chains to deliver the equipment we need to tackle changing global threats?
Secretary of State.
Yes, absolutely, and I was delighted to visit David Brown. It is the famous David Brown of the Aston Martin, David Brown, in Huddersfield, and when you go there, you realise not only the importance of keeping the skill base going, but making sure you have a clear pipeline of orders and pathways to incentivise those companies to invest in the next generation of machinery, because if they don't feel incentivised, they will not invest. And when we need them at a time of war, there simply won't be anything there. Or as I said about some of the rearming of our stockpiles, re-stimulating the supply chain takes years and years. It's incredibly important. It's also important to recognise that the aerospace industry is pan-United Kingdom. It's right across the United Kingdom. It is everywhere. And people don't often realise that it is not just in Lancashire, where I represent. It is in mill towns. It is in Scotland, in Wales. It's all over the place. And it really does help. A defence pound helps British economy and secures British jobs right across the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Because the Secretary of State is a thoughtful man and has today announced that we're going to be spending £50 billion on defence at a time when every other government department is under pressure financially. He has also said that he predicts that this country will be at war within 7 years. Does he have any idea or process to bring about more peace in the world, more rapprochement in the world, less of a military threat in the world, or are we going to go on year by year increasing expenditure on defence and being involved in potentially more and more military conflicts? Does he have any idea different to that?
Secretary of State.
Look, the honourable gentleman knows me fairly well. We had once spent a nice week in Iran together. With me and the then member of Blackburn. I was the most pro-European of the three, I remember, on that trip. But I'm not out looking for war, right? We are all out here trying to defend our nation by avoiding war. But you do not avoid war by not investing in deterrence. You have to invest in sometimes hard power to complement soft power. We don't want to use it, we don't go looking for it, and I know the right honourable gentleman mixes with some people who always think this is about warmongering or war. It's not. But if you aren't taken seriously by your adversary, it is one of the quickest ways to provoke a war.
Anthony Mangnall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman, the Defence Secretary, for an extraordinary 4 years in which he has done his duty above and beyond, and he will be sorely missed. Can I welcome this refresh, and particularly the points he makes around the global campaign and how it might complement aid, but in regard to our service personnel who do so much for us in the field of conflict, can I just ask how we might recognise them under the concept of what he's talking about in terms of campaigning? When they are away for extended periods of time, what is the Ministry of Defence going to do to ensure that they are recognised for the extraordinary service that they do?
Our men and women are motivated by lots of things, and the state often shows its appreciation not only when they're serving by the sort of X factor, the wraparound, but also by medallic recognition. One of the things that has taken quite a long time in my tenure is the creation, and I'm still waiting for the final approvals by those medal committees, for something called the Wider Campaign Medal, to recognise people's contribution to a campaign that keeps us safe. A good example of that could be the continuous at-sea deterrent. It is an enduring campaign. The thing about campaigns that reflect modern war is not everyone is in the front line. People hundreds of miles away are contributing to keeping us safe, and they sometimes need to be recognised, not just the person pulling the trigger or storming the bunker. It goes all the way back in today's military. The pyramid is very big and very deep, and hopefully a wider campaign medal will recognise that.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd pay my own tribute to the Secretary of State's service and also thank him for the personal courtesies he and indeed his officials have shown me on a number of occasions. The Secretary of State has been rightly focused during this time on the major geopolitical threats and risks to our own security and that of our allies. But he will also know the importance of watching the flanks and rears, and whether it's the Western Balkans, whether it's the Sahel that he mentioned, whether it's space, whether it's the polar regions, and whether it's the non-geographical domains in cyber and AI and those issues. He knows that the range of threats and the diversity of those threats is increasing. Is he absolutely convinced, given all of that, that we've got it right on the number of personnel? Because I simply do not think that I have no doubt about the capacity and the commitment of our troops in all of those areas and all those capacities, but the numbers are simply not there to deliver on that diversity and range of threats.
Well, Secretary of State.
The honourable gentleman actually agree with that as threat rises, we should respond and we should design our forces to meet whatever the threat is of the day. Do I think 73,000 is enough to meet today's threat? I do. But do I think defence needs a greater share of public spending? Yes. That's what the Chancellor said in the autumn statement. Do I think we need 2.5% of GDP? Yes. It's what I've campaigned for. It's what I've achieved. I haven't got a timeline, but I'm in that direction. And should we get the extra money, what's important about this is preparing us to have a range of choices depending on the threats of the moment. The Army will still be over 100,000. My right honourable friend from Billericay raised the challenge. I have instructed that the Army's modernisation requires us to protect their budget until they are modernised. They are behind the other two services, and we will continue to do so. But I do think they are currently configured aside. But do I say never about making them bigger? I think we should always be prepared to change our forces as the threat changed.
James Sunderland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I please thank the Defence Secretary for his statement and also his fantastic service over many years. Yeah. Given the current tempo of commitments faced by HM forces worldwide, I am clear, as a former capability planner, that quantity has a quality of its own. It is also incumbent upon the MOD to fulfil all of the expectations placed upon it, both by our NATO allies and by our own defence tasks. So could I please ask the Defence Secretary, post the refresh, whether he can confirm that the MOD remains committed to a fully deployable, scalable and sustainable armoured division at readiness?
Secretary of State.
Yes, we are committed to that, but we've also been honest about the time in the decade to get to being able to do that.
Tonya Antoniazza.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our forces families are made to live in damp, mouldy service accommodation with broken boilers. Now, the Secretary of State spoke in his statement about rent freezes, but well over 4,300 troops already don't pay rent because their accommodation is so bad. He said there would be no unfunded gimmicks. So is the 400 million in 2 years funding for service accommodation, is it new money, Secretary of State, or is it from existing budgets and commitments?
Secretary of State.
It is. We have taken, listen to the Honourable Lady opposite, for example, we have taken money that was allocated elsewhere and we've decided that that is more of a priority, is to make sure that those houses are in a better state than they can be. We have a housing stock that goes back many, many years and is a challenge. One of the challenges I have is I unfortunately have to pay almost £20,000 a house to a PFI project that Gordon Brown signed us up to, even when those houses are empty.
Scott Benton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I commend the leadership of my right honourable friend over the last 4 years, not just in terms of our response to the war in Ukraine, but also in securing a record financial settlement from the Treasury. I welcome the new employment model and skills framework. Is he able to outline how he thinks this will further facilitate collaboration with employers such as BAE Systems on the Fylde Coast and offer new opportunities for recruitment and retention?
Secretary of State.
Defence recognises, as does the defence industry, that skills are really important. I spent a great afternoon about 2 weeks ago up at Samlesbury in the National Cyber Force with FE colleges from around Lancashire, from Blackburn, from Bolton and Manchester, all coming to bring young people amazing opportunities. They came from not just Greater Manchester and Lancashire, recognising that we invest young, we get the skills we need. It's absolutely the case. Without the skills, defence will be starved of the oxygen we need to do our job.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first of all, can I also wish the Secretary of State well and thank him for all he's done. Whilst I welcome the £2.5 billion additional investment in stockpiles and the improvements to readiness, the Secretary of State will know that unless we have highly trained service personnel in place to use them, then they are useless. In the refreshed document that they were referring to today, it says people are most important asset. In relation to people, the UK now has the lowest number of soldiers since the Napoleonic War, which I think is quite dramatic when you realise that. So will the Secretary of State strategise to increase our strength in numbers to recruit young and capable people who want to honourably defend this great nation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? I sat in a plane yesterday with a guy from Belfast. He's 20-year-old. He signed up to the army for 25 years. He wants a future. Can we give him that?
That young man will have an excellent future in the armed forces for as long as he wishes to stay. What I would also say is, look, the army is still recruiting. Okay, it's not that we've just all stopped everything. The army is still recruiting, and also, what is very important to remember that we need to embrace our reserves. We have talked about it for a long time, but we haven't done it. So the Single Armed Forces Act will help us do that. So the Army will be over 100,000, of which 73,000 will be regulars. But I absolutely believe that the reforms in today will make sure we are scalable should we wish to increase it. But whatever we do, and whatever parties in this House come with pledges in the next election, ask yourself whether it's just about funding people, or will we be funding their equipment and their vehicles and their houses and their barracks to go along them with them, because we cannot just have people without any of that. Otherwise, we condemn them to a pretty miserable time, unprotected on the battlefield.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Defence Secretary for his statement? And he has been an outstanding Defence Secretary, and I wish him all the best for the future. I'm aware that soldiers should soon be able to easily transfer between each of the three services as well as into the civil service under the new Defence Command Paper. What steps are ministers taking to ensure that the civil service is a more attractive option for talented personnel than the private sector?
Secretary of State.
I think there's definitely a leaf to take out of the civil service for the military. I look at how civil servants can flex and do some step up, step down and take breaks or sabbaticals in the senior civil service, and I think, why can't we do that for our military? Why can't people, if their life circumstances change, why can't they step up or step down? And that's what we're trying to do with these changes in the Haythornthwaite regime as well. And I think if we do that, we will match the demands of Generation Z. The younger generation are wanting more and more different things, not just whether they work in defence, it's whether they work in the civil service or whether they work in the private sector. And all employers have a challenge in how they're going to do that and keep people longer so they get investment both ways into their businesses or whatever.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. I believe he said he might be returning tomorrow. Well, as I've got a lot of ministers here, I do want to just take the opportunity to say how important it is that there aren't any announcements made in statements that have not been previously given to the opposition. And just in case I'm not in the chair tomorrow, I would like to take this opportunity to wish the Secretary of State well in whatever he decides to do next. We now move on to the next statement. Minister Johnny Mercer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In March, I updated the members of this House on Afghan resettlement and relocation. To date, around 24,600 individuals have been brought to safety in the UK from Afghanistan, including some British nationals and their families, as well as Afghans who loyally served the United Kingdom and others identified as vulnerable and at risk. I am proud that our generous offer has ensured that all those relocated through safe and legal routes have been able to access the vital health, education and employment support they need to integrate into our society, including English language training for those who need it. On top of this, we have also ensured that all arrivals have had the immediate right to work, as well as access to the benefits system. In my last update, I made it clear that this government does not consider it acceptable that at the time, around 8,000 Afghans were still living in temporary bridging accommodation, preventing them from putting down roots in communities and building self-sufficient lives in this country. Around half of this number had been living in a hotel for more than 1 year. It was time to ask our Afghan friends to find their own accommodation with the support of this government and integrate into British society. The status quo is not fair to taxpayers, and crucially, it is not fair to Afghans. Since March, we have issued legal notices to quit and individualised communications to households living in hotels and service apartments, setting out when their access to taxpayer-funded bridging accommodation will end. Residents have received at least 3 months' notice to make arrangements to leave their hotel or service apartments, and clear guidance on the support they can access to help them find their own accommodation. Alongside this, we have significantly stepped up our support for those in bridging accommodation and to local authorities, backed by £285 million of funding to speed up moves into settled homes. We have ensured that enhanced multidisciplinary case working teams have been present in every bridging hotel and service department, working closely with households to help them navigate the pathway to find their own private rented accommodation. For local authorities, this funding includes over £7,000 per Afghan individual to enable